Alright, looks like we're broadcasting. Hi there, welcome to the Social Media Breakfast for May 21st. This is Social Media Breakfast Austin number 39, How to Hire a Social Media Manager. We're coming to you today from People Fund, and we're going to start the event here in about 15 minutes, so fast forward if you want to get right to it, and let us know what you think. Hey Mac, how are you? Me too. I think it's been a year since I've seen you. I think it was in this room. I'm probably sure it's been since then, but.
Oh, you weren't at the last one, or the one, not the last one, the last one at
always messing up. Sinead? Kirby Lane? Was it in March? I don't think I was there in March. I was in Florida. Yeah. I was not there for that. All right. Well, this seems to be working. I'm going to check it. Yeah. Last month, I had video or audio. I eventually got it figured out, but literally at the last second. It was really awful.
You have to identify the purpose.
We actually,
it's fascinating. Dallas is like here it's very much okay, good.
Yeah, that's from Joey, but that was the plan. So we're good?
We're good. Are you good? You need anything?
I just wanted to check with you. My itinerary, I've got teaser for the next breakfast.
No, my plan's in Austin, really soon.
We want to discuss the
Just, you could just say that we're preparing a larger event in August and getting the word out, and if you guys want to help us get the word out, that'd be great.
Okay. Am I calling it a Saturday workshop, or should I just very briefly discuss it?
Is it Saturday? Yeah, just kind of tease it. Just we're bringing in Amber. She's she had a recliner in. We're gonna charge for the event for breakfast and lunch and snacks. Packed with all kinds of information. Some of the members of the social media leadership are gonna social media breakfast leadership are gonna speak, as well as other experts in town. Just kind of we're putting it together. Just kind of whet their appetite.
Yeah. Okay, okay. Cool. That's what the idea and how you have kind of like a social media
It's working. Now I'm 18%. I don't know if I can do it though, so I'm gonna go in the other room. But you volunteer. Yay! Worked.
You're getting better.
I believe we did agree.
Okay.
There's nothing else we can announce today.
I think we're okay, yeah.
Good with that. I'm going to share the link to the Hangout.
Okay.
And we're 3 minutes to 8.
Yeah, we can ready to get started.
Yeah, so it was a really fun No, it definitely became challenging, and I think that was a challenge for was like trying to figure out who the audience was because it was so varied. So I think looking back, there were a lot of episodes that were like, oh, did this way, or did this way, you know. So it did always be focused in a lot of aspects of the market. Yeah, that's like even the
Bless you.
Yeah. So yeah, you always think it would be like super easy. Video game where it's like the game so you're very like single, like kind of like so I think that part of it.
Let the games begin.
audience that I work with now,
I think Megan didn't get herself in here. Yeah.
Friendly reminder, we love that you tweet, but put it on silent.
Put it on what?
Silent. All right, well, thanks for joining us today. I'm getting up really, really early. I'd like to thank the Social Media Breakfast Board, Joey in the back, Dana, you in the way, and Pat, who was so kindly checking out our minutes. Brian, here this morning, he's, working. So, we're an all-volunteer organization, but we are definitely non-profit. We appreciate y'all supporting us, and if there's any suggestions for topics you'd like to see, let us know. We're here to make your lives better, so let us know that. This morning, we, as you know, are at People Hunt. They were given us hostess and fill the space. First, considering today, provide all free breakfast tacos and coffee. So, we're going to make them on Twitter, just so y'all know. I'm going to introduce Gary from People Hunt and say a couple things.
Hey, welcome. Good morning, everybody. Well, first of all, we're really happy to have you here at People Fund. We're a nonprofit also, and we change people's lives. Every day, we take small business owners, underserved small businesses that nobody will work with, banks or traditional financing, and we inspire them, we educate them, we fund them, and then we elevate them to do a better thing. So that's where we support entrepreneurs and underserved entrepreneurs. So in the last 10 years, I've been dealing with over 5,000 loans with small business owners that don't have access to financing on Main Street. We're fiercely, and I mean fiercely, committed to social and economic justice, level the playing field for those who don't have the opportunity that others have. So that's what we're all about. Now, this wouldn't be possible, but we do. We have a great staff, and the people put together, basically they're standing in the back, they're a little tired, they're going to make it through Friday. But Lori and Becca are the ones who put all these events together, and we have 30 events upstairs and downstairs the entire week. And then Matt, the speaking gentleman in the back, the underwriter, he's the guy that says no when we have a little bit through. But the point is, we're all on the team together. He's really a bit of a talented group, and once again, we're so pleased to have you here. And you check us out on social media. But really have a great presence, and we're so happy to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. And speaking of these meetings they've done, they have sponsored Just Tweet. So, in a startup card, start yourself some work at me, use the hashtag InnovationWeek2014.
What does that mean? What's Innovation Week?
Gary, do you want to take that one?
Well, yeah, Google it. Innovation. Topics that we think are relevant to small business owners on a variety of topics. And we just have done this. We did it last year after the ride. For the fact that it's been heard this year, so we still call this a great opportunity. And when we get here to the place to put this together, so we have a real serious question I can answer.
Yeah, so it's basically 30 sessions throughout the week, upstairs and downstairs. The schedule is out on the table if you guys are interested in learning. All the sessions are free. And they're all different topics, marketing, social media, financials, basically everything you need to do to run a small business.
Questions, sir?
Yep.
We'll be around for two if anybody has questions.
At this time, we will ask for nominations for the Social Sleepwalker Award. If you're new to social media breakfast, it's our couple shaming. You look around and see the tiredest person, hey, we get a card too. Courtesy of people. So, nominations, who looks the most tired?
Ladies, nothing in his pockets. I nominate on.
All right, that's two. Anyone else? Any tired? Not here, winner.
Come on, guys, we can do better than that.
Yay!
Me and I'll post a picture online.
All right. This is the sleepiest man in the room.
Questions, you guys. And we have a couple of events we have coming up. Our next breakfast is July 10th, taking June off. The topic is going to be social networking in Austin for beginners. So, all kinds of connectors, please come and help them maybe feel welcome and meet cool people yourself and maybe give them some pro tips. And we are also producing a half-day workshop. Stay tuned, we're working it all out, but it's going to be in August, and we're really, really excited about some of the speakers we lined up. That's pretty much all the stuff I have, so I guess I'll introduce Brian. We're here today to explore what social media community managers do and how you find it all content writers and people. And Brian is an expert. He's employed by one of the largest employers of social media and community managers in the world. Yeah.
Sort of. But, yeah.
We'll say world because
Yeah.
Social media.org is a community where social media leaders of the world's greatest brands. Brian has 2 decades of leadership experience, and he is currently the VP of Community Development at socialmedia.org. He's responsible for recruitment of new open and 1,000 members and partnerships. So give him a round of applause.
Sure. Check this first. So before I get started, I do want to make sure, am I in about the right spot here? Okay, perfect. So I was told that we have a bunch of folks that are traditional social media breakfast type folks that are coming to these things all the time, and then some of the people in the room might be part of the Innovation Week that are startup or small business owners who are here for that. The Innovation Week startup folks, can you guys raise your hands? I just want to get a sense. Okay, we've got 3 or 4 of those. Okay. Please, everyone, feel free to interrupt, ask questions. I've got thick skin and not much prepared to say. So the more questions you have, the more we can elongate this thing. So, but especially for, I kind of tried to balance putting this together for just, okay, so what is the role of the right today in terms of community managers? Where do we come from a little bit? And then leave some open space to talk about this. If you're hiring your first social media manager at a startup versus if you're a bigger company. And so a little bit more background. I think listening to the description of people fund socialmedia.org is polar opposite. We work with billion-dollar companies to help their social media executives talk to each other in a private and safe space. So we have a bunch of folks that we have traditionally called social media or community managers that help moderate those discussions. And so we'll kind of get into how we do that and who we pick for that and how that's different than what a lot of people refer to as community managers today. But before, because the expectations that a lot of people were going to be thinking about how to hire, I thought we'd start with just basics, which is hiring is really hard. It's not easy at all. It's you know, a lot of the analogies of needle in a haystack and other things. When you need the right people, it can be very daunting to try to find an extremely specific culture fit, skill set, and especially with someone who's going to represent your brand. So they have to not only understand your audience, but also they have to be passionate about your product. If they're going to speak authentically about what you do. So anyone who represents you, whether it's a salesperson, a customer service person, a social media manager, a community manager, that person, that's a really important role. And it's hard to find someone who can speak confidently and have that sort of service attitude that needs to be balanced in a community manager role. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I just wanted to acknowledge up front, it's really hard. And we do hire lots of them, and I like to say that 76% of all percentages are made up on the spot, but there's lots of data out there that I didn't bother pulling out of other people's presentations about how bad it is when you make that hire. We don't know it. It's not only painful because you invested time in them, but it is really painful from a financial perspective and from everyone else's emotional perspective as you bring someone onto the team, especially if it's a tight-knit team, a small organization, you bring someone onto the team and other people start to like them or don't like them or whatever, having them not fit or not be successful in the role is really disruptive to the organization and everything else. So it's hard, it's important, and I'll say that for most of my career, I wasn't very good at it. I think I used the same voodoo that a lot of people use, and mostly we, science says we hire based on whether we like someone or not, which I don't know if that's a great way to go about figuring out whether someone's good at a job. So one of the things that we did with help with a few friends and expert recruiters is we took Klout, which I highly recommend, and we adapted a lot of the science that is around hiring to our process, and we elongated our process. We focused on a couple main things out of that, which is very, very specific scorecards. So we sit down and whether it's a community manager, or office manager, or vice president of people, or vice president of technology, we sit down and we write pages and pages of, and we collaborate to document exactly what does that person need to do, what kind of skills do they need, and we also look across our company and say, okay, what's our culture? What kind of people fit well here? And so whether it's a startup business or a large company, having that level of clarity and being able to articulate it and then measure for it and look for it and ask the right questions as you go through the process of interviewing someone, it's removing a lot of that voodoo or just hiring people you like that seem like a good fit. And it's really scientifically analyzing whether they really can do the job. And the interview process that it teaches, one of the core tenets there is to make sure that every interview has a specific function. What are you doing in that interview? And so, for ours, we've adapted to where the first one is kind of a general get to know you. The second one is a very skillful focus on the responsibilities they're going to have. Can they do this job? And you walk through everyone that you've documented and have them tell you stories about where they've done that work before. So I like to say if it's part of the job responsibility is stacking boxes, you don't ask them how they would go about stacking boxes. You ask them, tell me about where you stacked boxes before, right? And then the last piece is just the science, the making sure that you go through the process and have all the details, because a lot of what makes hiring hard is because we don't have a good process for it. So that really changed the way that we go about hiring community managers and everyone else, and it's made it a lot easier for us to feel comfortable that we're making good decisions, and the proof has been in the pudding. We've had a really we took our retention rate of new hires from 3 or 4 years ago, where we were on average about 50%. I think that's pretty normal, and we've taken it up to closer to 75 plus. So that's happiness for us, and according to all the data out there on the Googles, it helps us financially too. Just makes me feel better. So when you think about the term community manager, this is why I said sort of when we employ community managers. So we have community managers. We're actually going to be changing their name, partially because as you think about the term community manager, it's been eaten by social media. So years ago, before the idea of a community manager as the person who is curating Facebook pages and more focused on content calendars and so forth, the title community manager was primarily someone who moderated discussions in a community, which sounds right. So it was more of a membership focus, more of a moderator, discussion leader. It was more associated with associations. And it was more about creating a safe space for other people to talk to each other. As social media has become more and more prominent, the title community manager has been co-opted and completely overtaken by the idea of the social media manager, who's managing the online community of your Facebook fans or your Twitter followers and so forth, which is a community, but when you look at the change in the role and the responsibilities and how you hire for it, I wanted to make sure that we started with just a little clarification. So when people say community manager, you got to kind of ask them, what do you mean? Like, are you talking about someone who can run your Facebook page? Or are you talking about someone who can manage maybe an in-person discussion or manage an online forum and define the boundaries and the rules and so forth? And some of that obviously overlaps. So when I think about those two, there's kind of a spectrum to analyze when you think about what type of community manager you need. So on one end of the spectrum, you have people who just publish content, right? So a lot of Facebook pages and a lot of Twitter. If Twitter at a corporate brand is run by PR, it's basically just press releases. But if it's run by a community manager, then it may head towards more of a dialogue and engagement and trying to push content that creates and sparks conversation, right? Versus, I put Seth Godin over here on the far left because you can't comment on anything that he says, which is fine. He says lots of brilliant things. I've been following him for a long time, which basically also means that you don't have to buy his books because he will say everything for free on his blog. But it's great. It's great content. He's got tons of followers, but it's not about a conversation, right? As you move towards, I went and pulled Oreo off because it's easy to see from a distance, and they get a lot of fanfare for what they do. But if you go and check out their content, you're starting to move towards content and comments, but it doesn't feel like most of the time their purpose isn't really to get their consumers talking to their consumers, right? So that's what we mean by peer-to-peer. It's more about them talking to their consumers and maybe getting the consumers to talk back. When you think about a Forrester, this is more of they're primarily telling you, like, here's our great information. And occasionally they have forums or conversations where they bring in their clients to talk to each other. But for the most part, they want you to listen to them. And then you kind of head the other direction towards more about peer-to-peer. I was mentioning to someone earlier that I went on a trip to Turkey, and TripAdvisor was amazing because I wasn't going to people's websites or their social media pages to tell me what restaurant was the best. I was going to a bunch of other people who'd been to Turkey and listening to their comments and communicating with them, so it becomes more of a peer-to-peer. At socialmedia.org, we are 100% peer-to-peer. We don't tell our members what to think. Our community managers aren't publishing content. They will occasionally propose a discussion topic, but they're they're not there to be the experts. They have to have expertise, but that's so they can have the ability to moderate the discussions, not because they are the ones telling people what to say.
Just to ask about
Yeah, do it.
your presentation.
And who are you?
My name is Wesley Faulkner.
Cool.
Also one of the co-hosts for Indian Roundtable.
Yeah.
I've noticed a rule of thumb to make it easier for some people to simplify it. Would you agree with saying that most community managers participate on a platform that they own, less than a platform that they borrow? Let's say Facebook, because that's the best brand.
Right.
Its own, but Lithium or some other platforms.
Except private and hidden groups on Facebook are really powerful places to manage communities as well.
Good so groups at
That's
this
it.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think where we are is a really interesting time because the term is not static, right? And we, Community Roundtable and others, can do its best to define it for the world. But at the end of the day, if the world is putting out job titles for social media managers and calling them community managers, and that proliferates faster than your definition, then we're all going to have to just succumb to the fact that community managers are now social media managers to some extent, right? So then you get into, well, what's the difference between a community manager and a social media manager? My rule of thumb is, well, the community manager is primarily focused on the content and the communications there, whereas a social media manager has more strategy. Like they figure out where you should even be engaging in the conversation. They create the playbooks and they come up with a more broad view of responsibilities and make more decisions, as opposed to being the one managing the day-to-day. And in a small startup, that's all the same person. Maybe the chief bottle washer and VP of marketing and community manager and content calendar creator, right? So that's just sort of the way it goes, depending on how many hats you have to wear. So I like that, the ability to say, okay, well, as a matter of fact, I think as we get a little bit further along in this, right, and the questions that you ask to figure out what kind of skills you need and what kind of community manager you're looking for, whether you're talking about platforms or properties that you own versus properties that are more public space. A lot of times when you think about the owned property versus a public space, it also comes back to the idea that in a public space, like your Facebook page, many people have the philosophy of saying that it's not yours, right? Because Facebook's not yours, it's theirs. And so whatever you're doing or saying on Facebook is really just contributing to an environment that you don't own. And so you have permission to play there as long as you play nice. And you tell the truth and so forth. A little fuzzy on whether it's your Facebook page where you can actually shut it down and make it all disappear and control the comments and so forth. So how much of it do you own versus how much of it do they own? It's spectrum. Wow. Spectrum. Yes.
Hi, I'm Karen Krebs of Net Ingenuity, and my question is, you mentioned peer-to-peer communities. Do you make a distinction between existing customers and potential customers within that peer-to-peer community?
For our business or for other people's business? So for us, our community is exclusively for members. It's very, very private, closed off. It's exclusive because a large part of what makes it work is the fact that they're all vetted to be strategy decision makers at billion-dollar companies that can help each other without any bias. So none of them are allowed to be vendors or salespeople. They have to be there and share their experience generously without having something to gain from sharing that experience. And that's what makes our magic work. We often talk about people like you, right? The only people in the room are people just like you. So I think
I'm asking about a broader marketing, how you bring in more people into your customer base.
Yeah, so on the other end of the spectrum, right? So if you're Oreo and you're trying to get, what is Oreo trying to do on Facebook?
Sell cookies.
Sell cookies, right? Maybe, or brand awareness, or that will inevitably sell cookies. Remind me how much fun it was to dunk Oreos in milk. Nostalgia, right? So there's lots of things they're trying to accomplish, but at the end of the day, they probably have an ROI that they're trying to achieve on the efforts of that program, and I'm sure some of it is, but we're all Oreo customers, so it's not like there's anyone who's not an Oreo customer, right? From the beginning. So probably a bad example, but I think it depends on whether you're B2C and B2B. I think for the most part, those in a public community, like a Facebook or Twitter, you have to assume that some are going to be your customers, some are going to be your potential customers, some are going to be your competitors, some are going to be potential employees, right? So you kind of balance your audience. A lot of what the companies we work with do is they create profiles of who their audience is. This is something good for your community manager to do, is to have a persona or profile for what is your audience makeup depending on the platform. And a lot of times you'll find that they're different depending on whether you're talking about your online community on your website versus, or on a Jive or a Lithium versus your Facebook page versus your Twitter handle, right? So and if you have a Pinterest community, then that may skew differently than your LinkedIn group, right? So all of those have different audiences, they have potentially different purposes, and that may even inform for a larger organization whether you have different community managers that have a different style and voice per platform, right? So if your LinkedIn page is primarily a community of potential employees and you want to present what it's like to work at your company, that may be a different voice and a different tone and a totally different set of communications than your product group, who maybe have a forum. If you're a B2B company, it may be a forum of primarily customers helping each other. There are a number of tech companies that we've worked with have created customer forums, where those customer forums are primarily engineers at their company and engineers at their customers who talk to each other. And they found it very, very powerful. It reduces customer support costs. It increases the access for a lot of their kind of lower end clients that may not have been able to pay enough to get full customer support or engineering support. And now they're getting peer-to-peer engineering support from other customers who also aren't getting that engineering support, right? So they're sharing best practices and how they've been able to do stuff, and that's great. And you may not want to open that up to non-customers and competitors. So I think
when you bring Nando journeyman is sleeping. You bring a really important, point when we're talking about hiring someone to do this job for small business in particular, for really small business, which is my primary concern. This is typically the one person.
Yeah.
You mentioned, right? Social media, the content marketing, they're it.
Yeah.
And so what we're talking about is context. There's that content, right? It's a what are you doing in a specific time, and who are you talking with? So who's the audience? So that ability to switch, in a very small business scenario, I think it's one of those valuable things that I like to do, because there's no clear-cut if thing, right? There's no flow chart for this. It's about social intelligence, really.
Yeah, it's a good point. And for a smaller business, I think some of the structure you put in place, a lot of people call them playbooks, personas and various things, but a lot of the structure you put in place, as long as you sat down and defined, okay, what are we trying to do and who are we talking to on this platform versus this platform, or this community versus this community, are there customers there, are they not? Especially if you're hiring someone who's fairly new to social media. A lot of companies are hiring younger folks who have digital savvy and social savvy, but they may not have the context, and that's great, right? They may be great communicators, but you need to give them some framework to reflect and be intentional with what kind of communications they're giving, depending on the context, the platform, right? Mark.
When you talked about peer-to-peer interaction, Brian, do you think that LinkedIn groups can be effective for that?
I have an opinion, asterisk. I think that a highly moderated, exclusive LinkedIn group can be somewhat effective. And if it's highly moderated and extremely exclusive, it can last. I think one of the biggest problems with LinkedIn groups is that most of them are started by someone, the generosity of users who are interested in a group, or they're started by someone who has a specific self-interest, and as soon as that self-interest has either peaked or been satisfied, or it's obvious to them that their initial self-interest won't be satisfied by this LinkedIn effort, moderation and management goes away, and then it basically, we started the conversations, Wesley and I, we were talking about permascaping and architecting gardens, right? And you can go out and make the most beautiful garden, but then if you walk away and come back 5 years later, it's going to have done whatever it does, right? And unfortunately, whether it's a garden or a LinkedIn group, the most aggressive plants tend to take over, right?
That was such a wonderfully polite way to say that.
So that's my opinion on LinkedIn groups. We used one for an event that we had very effectively, but it was only for people who registered for the event, right? So as a communication channel for them, and we intentionally did. We have a community platform that we've promised our members is only for talking about social media at Big Brains. Our event isn't actually what we've promised them they're allowed to talk about there, and we've told them that we're going to defend that space only for those valuable conversations. So they're not allowed to bring up, hey, does anyone want to go out on Friday after this event on our community platform? Because we told them no, and Lauren over here will smack them down and make sure that they will respect our authority and not have those discussions. So what the LinkedIn group did for us was it gave us a place to give them more social, casual conversations centered around discussions about what to do at Disney with each other, so that we didn't corrupt or pollute the conversation on our primary platform. But it was still very, very exclusive, and only those who were registered and paying attendees were allowed in. Did you have any? I haven't introduced Lauren yet. Lauren is one of our membership directors / community managers / I'll get into, we're changing the name because of the complete sort of overtaking of the word community manager. Now when we talk to people about, the gravitas necessary to come in and talk to a room full of VPs at big companies and moderate a discussion and tell the vice president at Target to stop talking for a second because you want to let the person from Verizon continue. What most people hear when we say community manager is more like the person managing the Facebook page, and that's unfortunate, and that's causing us a problem, a mismatch in expectations when we're trying to recruit new candidates. So as part of the process of evolving with the industry and learning what people hear when we say that word is not what we want, not what we think. So that's why I started with what kind of community manager are you talking about? Because it's we kind of woke up after a few years of using the term for very effectively for ourselves and knowing what we meant, and realized the world had completely gone in another direction. Scratched our heads and said, okay, well, this is going to have to change. So how we do it. Whether it's hiring a community manager or anyone else in our company, we start with some core principles. Some of this is educated by who, some of it's educated by experience, some of it's educated by reading Inc. magazine and Harvard Business Review. But we've come to the culture first, because you can spend a lot of time drilling into the details of whether someone can and has done a job. But if you get to the end and you go, you know what, I don't really want to work with this person, or they're not weird like us. I say that a lot, weird like us. We know that we're a unique environment that has a certain personality. Not that everyone needs to be homogeneous and fit into our personality, but we know that we're documenters and we're self-improvers, and we all are mission-driven and passionate about what we're trying to build, and we've figured out that people who that doesn't resonate with, that story doesn't resonate with, they don't last long. They get tired of us and don't fit in all that well, and that's okay. So let's just figure that out up front, right? So we're self-aware and we're really transparent about our self-awareness. I'll come up with some horrible analogies for this, so I'm going to just leave them behind. But maybe later, over a beer. It's too early. It's basically, you have to be, one that I've used in the startup world for a long time is, it's like being on a small boat. And you're going to be on that small boat all day for a long time. So if you can't, there are many litmus tests, right? If you can't imagine wanting to sit next to this person on a cross-country plane ride, or at a minimum, if you just don't enjoy spending an hour talking to them, it's probably not going to improve in time. So at that point, there's a lot of culture stuff, but it's not just whether you like them. We go in, again, science, right? We know that we're documenters. We know that we're the type of people who love databases and love the fact that when you put a bunch of information in the database, you can come back later, you can find it, you know where it is, and you can use it, and that's awesome. And people who are like, I don't like that, not cool, then they're not us, and that's fine. They won't like it where we are. So, trust and gut on negatives. I guess this is probably a better, nicer way to say what I mean by if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't feel like they're going to show up and have fun here. One of the core, I've been doing a lot of recruiting lately, and one of the core things I tell people right up front is, I'm looking for two things. Number one, can you do the job? But as importantly, will you find joy in the job? And that means, do you like the work, and will you like it here? And if we're weird, I need to just be honest. We're weird up front. We're weird. Those are some of the things that make us tick. And then values. We often get in discussions about whether this is a skill or a value, and the best way that I've come down on this is skills can be taught, and values they show up with. And you're not ever going to teach someone to care about the same things you care about. So if it's a value, just know up front, like, this section of things they have to have. And if we're saying that they have to have these values to have this job or be good at this job, so for a community manager, one of the things we've talked about is they have to be a relationship person, right? They have to like people. If they fundamentally don't seem to like people, I don't think they should be a community manager. Right? And I have friends that I like a lot that don't like people, and they shouldn't be community managers, and they're really good at their jobs, but they don't talk to people. That's good, right? So that's what I mean by values, things that are more character-driven, so who they are from a personality standpoint, that aren't going to change. Don't overlook those for any job, whether it's this job or that job. Make sure that you've mapped those out. What values or characteristics are going to be important in that job? And so a couple of these fit in that bucket, right? So process-driven, I don't think that's a skill. I think that's a value. Either someone likes to be organized, and they like to have checklists, and they like to talk about whether they use @task or Trello for how they manage their weekend project, and they're kind of geeky like that, or they're not. And they're like, well, I wing it. And I just, I know what I need to do, right? And that's fine. Again, plenty of friends that I love and respect that are wing it people, and they're incredibly creative and artistic. Probably not a membership director at socialmedia.org. Because we need them to be able to follow a process. Again, even for your startups and small businesses, as you think about Nando's conversation about context earlier, right? So if you have 5 platforms you're communicating to your potential customers or your potential employees on, and they can't stop and follow a checklist of saying, okay, first I need to be intentional about who's my audience here, and go through that process. They're not process driven. But they're very creative. They may be talking to the wrong people. So, anyways, here on the essentials, the 5 key things we look for when it comes to a membership director. There's lots of others. I said 7 pages of detail. But the core essentials we just say have to have. Moderator experience. This is a skill. It can be taught, but the depth to which we take it, and I have great admiration for our team because they study the science of moderation like it's nobody's business. It's cool to watch. I got a crash course in it last year, and it's pretty impressive. But they think about every detail, and they document every detail, and they talk about every strategy, down to how to politely interrupt someone and redirect, or how to take a topic that just really shouldn't be talked about, compliment the person for such a great question, and then figure out where to bury that. Right? So they practice and strategize about all those little details, and they document them in pages for, what ifs, right? So that moderator experience from the beginning, if you don't know what that looks like, we're starting too far away in terms of skills, right? Relationship person we already talked about. They have to like people. Context and empathy, I think, doesn't matter what your business is. This one's really important and often overlooked. For us, context means they have to understand what it's like to be an executive working in a really, really big company. That's different, right? Not everybody has that experience. You may be an extremely good people person who's had moderator experience, but if you've never worked in a big company and you don't know anyone who's worked in a big company, and you just don't know what it's like to have to turn in your TPS reports on Friday and sit through another 8-hour day of meeting after meeting and not sure who called the meeting or why you had it. I'm not trying to bash big companies. Small companies have just as many quirks. Silicon Valley is doing a good job of showing off its issues, right, and neuroses, but you have to have the context, right? So I'm not sure that anyone who's only worked in big companies finds Silicon Valley all that interesting. The TV show. So they have to have the context, or they can't have the empathy. If you can't understand the struggles that someone else is going through, then it's really hard for you to provide authentic support for them as they go through them. So we look for the context, and we occasionally find people who are really awesome, but they don't have any idea what it's like to be an executive at a big company. And they can't imagine it, and they're not going to do a great job of connecting with those people and then connecting those people to each other, right? So, what, go ahead.
Do you teach them how to, so you find somebody, you can just teach them how to imagine being that executive?
No. They have to have, and if they don't, they can learn it. It takes a long time, and we don't generally have the tolerance to teach it because it takes too long, right? So we're looking for them to come in with that, and it's not anything bad, but for how many people here have worked in a company that has over 5,000 employees? Okay, so how many of those same people have worked in a company that has less than 50 employees? And if you worked in both, you have the context of both. What I find, people who've only worked in 5,000 plus employee companies go to their first startup and they have no clue what the heck is going on. And you take a small business person who's never worked in a big company, you take them and put them for their first time in a big business, they can adapt. But almost every time, the first time's a failure because there's so much adapting to this new environment that just the environment and the behaviors in the environment are so foreign that it takes a while to pick up. So I think it's an incredible person that can shift immediately from one to the other without ever having been there. That's my experience. anyone's welcome to disagree with me, but we're looking for the context. So to give you a different example, I think that one of my favorite, I think it's the book Brains on Fire, right? One of my favorite community stories is about Fiskers, the Fisketeers, right? And so the community managers and the moderators for that community had to know and have context, and therefore could have empathy. I'm not saying that just because you have context you have empathy. I think both of those are important, but you can't have very authentic empathy without the context. So they're basically, do you know the story of the Fisketeers? So the Fisketeers was this awesome community built by Fiskers, the scissors.
Okay. It's a scissors.
It's yeah. So it was a community of sewers, right? Crafts people, right? And they did an amazing job of helping those people that had a lot of common passion around sewing and crafts come together. But you can imagine I would have been a horrible moderator. I may know all the skills of moderation. I don't know the first thing about the context of their lives, what they care about. I can't say. So without that context of knowing who those people are, what their lives are, and then probably some shared passion around that, probably not going to be a very good community manager or a moderator, or know what kind of content to post that's going to resonate with these people. So I think those are important things that I think often get overlooked in terms of trying to hire someone for a specific role. Is you look for a set of skills. Are they good communicators? Can they write well? Are they smart? Do I like them? And then you may forget that, oh, but wait a minute. Do they care about these people, right? And that's really a core ingredient to the community manager, in my opinion. Industry knowledge, that kind of speaks to the same thing. I'd be a horrible Fisketeer. And then for us, it's process driven. Some other things to consider. Writing skills. This is something I think that by the time you're hiring someone, you also can't teach them this. And you can't teach them the more subtle and important thing of having the ability to write with personality. Took me a long time and a lot of meetings to stop writing like a corporate drone in the corporate environment. So I grew up in the corporate environment and therefore wrote in the corporate environment like corporate drone. Business speak, formal, no personality. Not my personal life. You got a personal email from me, and it's very, normal. But I think the skill set of being able to write with personality that's engaging, that doesn't sound like a robot, is a skill that especially smaller businesses, well, actually everybody, anyone who's communicating, you should vet this, right? You should make them write you a bunch of stuff, and then when you read the answers, if you're finding yourself wanting to skip over the answer, that's a bad sign, right? That's a good litmus test for, okay, they write boring. We talk about context and empathy, but it's so important that we now that maybe put it on 7 slides. Passionate about what you do, critical, and it doesn't matter whether you're on the moderator end of the spectrum or on the content end of the spectrum. I don't think that you can be an excellent community manager, or you can be a solid, skillful community manager, but I think without the passion and the context and the empathy, all you are is skillful. You're not going to be connecting and really great at that job. So for some of the smaller companies, I put in actually bigger companies too. A lot of folks who are moving into and can make the quick shift from one type of communication style on one platform to another kind of communication style, and understand the idea of audiences and personas and how to shift that pretty quickly, have been trained in journalism. And lucky for all the big companies and small companies out there, journalism isn't a hot market right now. So anyone who's studied it has a bunch of skills in communicating and not a lot of jobs available to them. Newspapers, they're not doing so well. So I've seen a lot of folks who are now running newsrooms at big brands, where basically big companies have said, you know what I need is someone who can take a bunch of content, edit it quickly, and come up with a calendar of when to post what. And that sounds like a newsroom, right? So a lot of folks who were the producer at a local television station or an online magazine or in the newspaper business have very effectively moved into management roles around social media teams, because they translate very well, right? Where else are you going to find someone who can create massive amounts of content, organize it, publish it, and make it interesting? Gravitas versus peppiness. This is something we talk about every now and then, and I think that on the spectrum of consumer to B2B and moderator versus more content, right? So Oreo community manager who's responding to folks, probably more on the peppiness end of the spectrum versus someone who is trying to engage executives at a big company, or if you're going to be the one running a forum of oil and gas executives, peppiness probably isn't going to be very effective there. So kind of another spectrum that we think about is the personality and the mesh. Cool. That's for when I'm supposed to shut up and ask questions?
That's just a 5 minute
Oh, okay.
warning.
Jim.
I'll just say for your journalism thing, the key is you have to convince them that they have to do journalism. Once they realize they're no longer a journalist, but that's a skill, that's when they're great. The problem is often they want to be a journalist. They don't see it as just a calling until they've made that change. They won't make the move.
Got it. Interesting point. I haven't had to do that yet personally. So, not that I just personally haven't encountered the still staunch journalist, right? The poet. I've met a poet. But not the journalist who still wants journalistic integrity. Introduce slowly. So this is for everybody. It doesn't matter the size of your community or what kind of community you have. You could be a sandwich shop. Before you turn over your brand and voice to someone, do a lot of controlled vetting. Also brings me to another thing we put in our process. If you're hiring someone to do anything on your social media, go and do a really deep check of their social media, right? We learned this the hard way, but what I'm you should go and read hours of their Twitter and check out what's publicly available on their Facebook. I'm not saying I'm legal disclosure. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. But if it's publicly available on the internet and they're going to be hosting stuff on the internet, find out their sensibilities around that job, right? If they're, driving a truck for you, I'm not sure it's as important. Still, maybe a good idea. But if they're going to be the one who's filtering and curating what you put on the internet, you want to know what their sensibilities around putting stuff on the internet are, right? And also introduce slowly, because you've done a bunch of work to create a great community and create following and have a bunch of employees and a bunch of customers, and you poured a bunch of passion into that. You don't want to turn the impression of that over right away. Make sure it's going to stick and they're going to fit and watch what they are going to post or what they do plan on saying for a while before you make them the voice or the face of your brand. Service-oriented is something we look for across our entire company, but when it's, I think when you're looking at community managers, if a lot of what they're thinking about is themselves, they're probably not going to be all that great at community management. So you kind of look for a character, a service-oriented character, whether that's past jobs or just the way that they treat the person that they meet when they walk in the door. Are they the type of person who's going to walk over and pick up a piece of trash in the office because they don't mind doing that? It's not about them or ego or whatever. I think that's an important intangible that may get overlooked. So I think that's it. I hope I didn't did I cut into the Q&A time?
We were good. Actually, everybody was really engaging today. So we have about 5 minutes to kind of go with more Q&A and then wrap it up. Just after networking.
Karen.
Right. This, of course, will vary depending on the size of the employer and the job, but how do you manage the community manager's time or ask them to report what they did? How do you structure their time or ask them to structure their own? And how do you pay them?
Okay.
Whether they're freelance or full-time.
That is a huge question. Like, there's probably write a book on it. I couldn't. I could probably get a bunch of smarter people to write a book on it. But there's just a lot there, right? So how do you measure them? I think it starts from business goals. So what are your goals of the community, or what are your goals of your social media program? So if we're talking about a social media program.
I'm talking about, like, you tell them spend 2 hours a day on Facebook and 1 hour on Twitter and 1 hour updating the website, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I would drive that back to what are your goals. So if you have a clear set of goals for the program they're running, then you can come to the right answers as to where they should spend their time and how much. Little plug for a book I love, but it's the same principles. A book called How Will You Measure Your Life? But how will you measure your life? And it's by Darren Christensen. He's a Harvard MBA professor. It's basically taking his theories class and applying it to your life. And the theories class is, no matter what you're doing, how to measure it starts with what are your goals. And then you want to measure the value you've placed on the goals, then you're out of alignment. You need to fix that, right? So if your goal of hiring a community manager or a social media manager is to increase e-commerce driven from click-throughs on your Facebook page, then you're going to have to come up with a strategy for how to drive traffic to your Facebook page and create a following, and then what is your strategy for executing on a click-through and measuring that over to your website where you're going to sell some stuff. That's the simple e-commerce method. Most people don't have that, right? Most people are building a community around something. Let's say you're Torchy's Tacos here in town. You may have some ability to post coupons that then get redeemed and track that at your point of sale. But for the most part, you're not going to be able to measure how your online presence, Facebook or Twitter, translates into tacos. It's a challenging thing, right? So you're going to have to come up from the beginning with what are your goals? Is it brand awareness? Is it just community engagement? Is it to promote certain things? And then figure out the metrics to map their time and effort back to those goals.
So is socialmedia.org a nonprofit?
No.
Okay, so both of those are commercial ventures that are interrelated.
Yes. So quick answer to that question. Gas Pedal is the holding company. We're a community company. And so what we do is we take the tool of building private exclusive communities for the strategy decision makers at big companies. And then we take topics, and the first of which is social media. We take topics that we believe have a positive impact on the world, that we care about, and that there's some poor, lonely executive who runs this thing. It's brand new, it's really hard, they're scared, they need help, they need friends. We think that topic around social media is a forcing factor in the world that there's some, we call them good guys, right? The women and men who run social media at big brands are teaching their companies to be more human, be more honest, to listen better. And so social media is changing corporations in a positive way if they do it right. And we look at other topics, and the next couple of topics we want to venture into and apply the same community model to are things like wellness and sustainability, where if we can get Coca-Cola and Target and Wells Fargo and AT&T to sit in a room together, and the person who's responsible for employee wellness or the person who's responsible for sustainability where you probably can't get a great MBA course on how to run sustainability at Coca-Cola. If we can get them talking to each other, we can help that, create that safe space, and we can help accelerate that topic through and leverage the resources of the biggest, baddest companies on the planet. But we're helping them get a little bit better. And even if we take $300 billion companies and make them all 0.5% better, that's a meaningful thing. So that's what gas pedal is. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question.
You talked about defending the contents and creating these discussions peer-to-peer. Most companies here are probably not creating these discussions just out of selfless reasons. There's reasons to have, like, for example, the Torchies promoting, like, your reserve coupons or whatever. Side effects of those discussions are actually understanding or discovering new market needs that perhaps weren't there. So what are the guidelines of community managers on how to either dive deeper into those discussions to discover what that need is, and when to take it offline back to the developers or the tortilla makers that suddenly make a gluten-free tortilla?
Yeah.
Because those two communities don't necessarily need to be in the same space.
So I think short answer, off the cuff, training them to be aware and giving them permission to speak internally about what they're experiencing is important, and then give them some tools to for a listing strategy, so that they can pull out what are well, give me the data behind your anecdotal experience that there need to be gluten-free tacos by showing me the 700 mentions in the last 60 days of gluten-free tacos, right? So marry those two things.
Those 700 mentions are not icing.
Right. Do you have a relationship with Torchies? Kidding.
I do love tortillas. They're within a mile of my house.
Yeah. I think that those are the things, right? Tell them that it's part of their job is to pay attention, give them permission to speak up, but then require them to have data to back up their anecdotal experience.
All right. Well, I think we're done.
Cool.
We have a winner of the best tweet. Phil West, can you stand up? He tweeted, "What? You have to like people to be a good community manager?" Thank you, People Fund. All right. Well, thanks all for coming. Just a reminder, July 12th or 10th is our next big event. So look for the Eventbrite. It'll be published soon.
Work on that.
It's part of what public makes you create and design. Maybe not a Do you have a card? Okay. I want to send you
What I was curious about is Brad's working, you all use that top rating.
Yeah, it works really well, but just I don't think there's one right process. Having a process.
But for me, what it getting is more time to contact. I mean, even having hiring being appointed, having people for your vocabulary confusion, meticulous attention to the details. Pick out things that you need to learn about, so like I haven't read
we were Jim Smart, Brad Smart. So it's taking and modernizing some of Brad's Smart top grading, putting it into a different package, but it's a lot of the same top grading.
Well, people have friends, so whether one but have a menu. It didn't exhaust. I struggle under it.
That's what these, like a lot of the social media managers is really taking over what we communicate.
Well, and some of it, I
Don't mind me, I need
I'm gonna buy the 3 for the I haven't read